Hi, this is Mark, and I'm listening to Linux for Everyone from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Welcome home.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Linux for Everyone. And might I also extend a very enthusiastic welcome home. Yes, sorry for that RSS feed jump scare. I did not mean to alarm you today, but Linux for Everyone is back. The podcast is back. The website is almost back. And the video channel is up and running with about 3 or 4 new videos in the feed over there. Unlike last time, this is not a one-off return from a hiatus. This is let's kick the tires and give it all we've got this time. I'm not going to front load this episode with a whole bunch of filler, but I have to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. Number one, the theme song that you just heard it might sound a little bit different. It might sound a little bit refreshed, a little bit more polished. That is because Jerry Morrison's band, Baseball Bat, took the song that he wrote, originally called Brain Dead, which was the original theme song for, let's call it the Linux for Everyone Legacy show. And they went into a studio and made a fantastic version of that song. And the band very graciously allowed me to use the new version for the YouTube channel and for the podcast. And so I'm going to have links to Baseball Bat's Bandcamp. Definitely go check out the song and their EP. It's really fantastic. As far as what to expect in your RSS feed over the next several weeks, I have a conversation scheduled with Mike Kelly, the creator of Nixbook OS and the Computer Upcycle project, as well as a chat with Veronica Explains, and kind of a big surprise, which maybe I'll just give away, a big ol' roundtable discussion featuring Liam Daw from GamingOnLinux.com, Gardner Bryant, and Nick from the Linux Experiment. But my first guest on this little revival tour is Graham Morrison. Now, if you listen to Late Night Linux, you know very well who Graham is. But for those not in the know, he is a technical writer at Canonical. He is a co-host of Late Night Linux, and he was the former editor of both Linux Format Magazine and Linux Voice. Since Graham is quite a VR geek, I thought it would be awesome to get together and have a conversation with him about the gamble that Valve is taking on ARM, the state of Linux and VR, and a whole bunch of other stuff like FEX, and how Valve has secretly been funding this project since 2016. All kinds of, it was just a great conversation, and I'm going to stop babbling so that he and I can babble together. Anyway, it's so wonderful to be back, and I am so grateful that you're still here for the podcast, and without any more delays, let's get into it. Graham, welcome to Linux for Everyone for the first time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jason.
I gotta remember to look at the camera. It's been, like I was telling you before we hit record, it's been 3 years since I've done an on-camera interview for this show, or this channel, and this brand. That was the most fun I had doing Linux for Everyone, was the conversations. So I'm really looking forward to this. So thanks for being the guinea pig, the first one to kick it off.
Hey, it's no problem. I have no idea what you're going to talk about or ask me about, but it'll be fun.
That's right. No notes. No notes, except that I sent Graham about 2 hours before we hit record. I sent him an email with the full text of the article that The Verge published about an interview with Pierre-Loup Graffet at Valve. And it is wild. Some of the questions I was going to ask you have been answered definitively, I think.
You looped me into this because I really care about VR. You know, ever since I was a kid, any opportunity I get to talk about virtual reality.
Ever since you were a kid?
Well, yeah, so I was a teenager in the 90s. And at least in the UK in the 90s, you got these sprawling mega arcades. And in those mega arcades in the mid-90s, you got these units called Virtuality. Which actually were powered by an Amiga 2000 and then 2 cheap PCs that created these great big VR headsets you could put on your head. So this is 1992, 1993. Super, 5 frames a second, just simple polygons. Sometimes they'd put them side by side and you'd put on this headset and for me, it was just a whole different world. I've never been able to forget about that. And I have to say, Palmer Luckey really reignited that dream for a lot of people, and me included, with the idea of VR coming back into mainstream.
When did the Virtual Boy camp come out? Because I think that is what killed any excitement for VR for years.
Yeah, you're right. And it was a hack. But even in the 80s, you got, at least in the UK, you got these Tomy headsets, which would have like these little displays that would pretend to be 3D kind of driving or 3D something else. Anything 3D on my head. And to me, it's just a whole different level of immersion. And so I'm into it.
Okay, let me back up. There's a tradition that I have to follow. And because since you've never been on the show before, I would love to know, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know, what was your Linux and open source origin story? How did you discover it? What made you jump into using Linux and being involved?
So I actually just mentioned the Commodore Amiga. And the Commodore Amiga was my gateway drug to computers. It's an incredible machine. I still have an Amiga behind the screen in front of me.
Oh, wow.
It's still connected and plugged in. And seeing an Amiga, touching a mouse for the first time, seeing 4096 colors, that's what got me into computers. And I studied computers at university. And honestly, I was bored by the prospects of working in the computing environment that I found in the mid-90s. I tried a few things with a friend, did some 3D graphics, ended up doing websites, which, I've never had very much business sense, but I was bored by doing websites in the late 90s. And then I discovered on the cover of a magazine, Mandrake Linux. So I tried to install Red Hat 5.2 on my Amiga, but Mandrake in the late 90s was the thing that really did it for me. And I got so into it, I developed a piece of what became very popular open source software called K-Album in the late 90s.
K-Album. Music library management?
It was photo management. Before iPhoto, it looked remarkably like iPhoto. Okay, so that's a stretch. This was 2001. But this was before iPhoto, and it was included in lots of distros, and I couldn't believe that I could sit on my own somewhere in my bedroom, literally not speak to anyone for 6 months, throw this software out there. It took me 6 months to build the RPMs, throw that software out there, and then get all kinds of people emailing me.
And that's how games like Doom were distributed back in the day, right? Yeah. It was just strictly word of mouth and people talking on BBSs and that's fine. By the way, side note, I think the early 2000s for me was 2006 era, like that was peak UI design for me.
Yeah, I've always
love how
KDE.
Software looked back then.
So, but the thing is, I'm a poor programmer, and I actually realized I enjoyed, maybe like you, I enjoyed writing and helping people and trying to describe the things that they needed to do, and I became a journalist. So I worked for Linux Format magazine, which was the biggest selling Linux magazine. I became the editor.
I mean, that magazine was on newsstands, right?
Yeah, it was global. Yeah. There were Greek, Italian, Russian translations. In fact, it only closed.
That's incredible.
Last year. Well, I joined the team and then stayed long enough to become the editor. It's like the last person standing in a situation like that.
We have that slightly in common. Not even my story is not even close to the extent of yours, the scope of yours. But I ran a indie music magazine called Kill Your FM. That's how I got my tagline everywhere, my username everywhere. It was, Kill Your FM, obviously meaning ditch radio, embrace podcasting and indie music and all that stuff. And so we were one of the first, people don't know this these days, but like the Sony PSP was a marvel of a machine. And we had up to, I think at one point, we were writing this music magazine every month and distributing it exclusively on the PSP through some homebrew software that was made through RSS back in like the first or second year that RSS existed. And we could include, MP3s with the artist's permission. We can include little tiny, like low res videos. And we had up to 10,000 people reading that at one point just on the Sony PSP. So, wow. And I was the editor of that, and it was an absolute blast. The distribution, the PSP and the Vita, inadvertently became such brilliant things for homebrew software. Incredible. Yeah.
After Linux Format, a few of us left Linux Format and crowdfunded a magazine called Linux Voice, which was our dream. We did that ourselves. Really wonderful part of my life, but very difficult. We really struggled for money. We did this for maybe 2 or 3 years. People who know the Linux Voice story know that in the end we had to hand it over to Linux Magazine so that subscribers wouldn't lose out completely. And we all kind of went our own separate ways. And so for almost the last 9 or 10 years, I've been working for Canonical as a technical author there.
Oh, okay.
Helping with the documentation at Canonical.
Oh, right.
I was able to pay off my debts.
Is so important. So you're not throwing all of your documentation on Discord then?
No.
Oh man, okay, no, we won't go there. But I had to get a little jab at that practice anyway, because I keep seeing that, and it's like I had to submit a help ticket for something through Discord, and all their documentation FAQs are on Discord. All that data can just go away and you have no control over it at all.
Oh, I agree. I don't know, maybe it's my age, but I'm very much, I use bulletin board systems and FidoNet. I'm used to archiving things and wanting the web to be my archive, and things need to be open. RSS is so fundamental. And, there's a generation now that don't understand this as a right. I'm sounding old and complaining.
You know what? Go ahead. You know what? I turned 50.
Whoa.
Well, year.
Actually, you don't look it, I have to say. I'm not.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I don't feel it either, which is nice. I hope that continues. Okay.
We're a similar age then.
We're actually here to talk about VR. We're not going to cover, the details and the summary of Valve's hardware announcements, because that's been done. I wanted to talk about the Steam Frame specifically, because just this morning, I read that interview that The Verge did with Pierre-Luc Griffet at Valve. It had some revelations in there, and I just kind of wanted to have an organic conversation about the Steam Frame, the state of Linux VR, and how what Valve's doing might affect, I guess, the adoption of ARM. We kind of know your background in VR. You obviously got started in the 90s, but more recently, what have you been into?
So, with Palmer Luckey and the Oculus Rift, that's when I got back into it. And I haven't bought into the Facebook side of VR, I have to say. That's just too much of a stretch for me. But everything but that I've been into. The HTC Vive that Valve co-produced at the similar kind of times to the Oculus Rift, that was that moment where that kind of bridge between the mid-90s and, 2016, that was my dreams kind of realized, that you could put this thing on your head. And even then, Valve was considering Linux. Steam VR eventually came to Linux, and that's itself been a long story. And that's what's so, I think, amazing about the Steam Frame, is that it seems Valve are all in on Linux. When I first heard about it, I first assumed they'd got their own version of, a lineage-based Android or something, and they were going to run their own Steam APKs on top of that. But no, it's not.
It's Steam OS. They just casually, it wasn't even mentioned in the big, nicely produced trailer that they did. They just glossed over the fact that, hey, by the way, we put a ton of resources into porting Steam OS to ARM, which has its own huge implications. But that was my gateway to VR, was the HTC Vive. I was at Forbes at the time. I was at Forbes in and out for many years, and I reviewed it, and it was magic. It felt like magic to me. The problem with it was that eventually I moved, and I didn't have the space really to keep following
Yeah, because you needed the tracking units. In fact, there's one behind my head.
You needed the two, right? There was, probably a good 8x8, 6x6 space. And I just, I never had that, and didn't have a room to devote to VR, essentially. And so I kind of fell away. And so now I feel like I'm sort of an audience surrogate. I feel like a lot of people right now might be also kind of seeing their curiosity for VR reignited, or maybe for the first time they're interested because of the Steam machine and the Steam frame. I guess let's talk about where does Linux sit in the VR ecosystem right now?
It's been a pretty flaky experience up to now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Valve has officially supported it for some time. For quite a long time, you needed almost specific NVIDIA devices, specific versions of NVIDIA drivers.
That's surprising. Wow.
For quite a few years, and the experience was suboptimal, and this is pre-Proton being a real thing.
Right.
You had to run native Linux binaries, and there are very few. Performance really took a hit on Linux with Steam VR. We've got all this problem with X11 and Wayland, and the kind of pipelines through to a VR system running is basically this dual screen off an HDMI link. Made it very difficult. Windows was the default choice if you wanted to really experience VR. And that's what I think has really changed. You could see, I think it was what Valve intends to do. You could see that it was investing time and money into Steam VR and supporting all the various technologies that go into making that work. But there was no end goal. And I think now we can see that the Steam frame, or the ecosystem that the Steam frame perhaps signifies, is the beginning of that. It's so exciting. I mean, I'm excited about so many aspects of this. A little bit underwhelmed by the screen technology, but I'm not going to let that affect me.
Or were you hoping for OLED? Is that why?
I really was. I mean, you talked about the PSP earlier on and the Vita. I have to say, especially and this is something that the HTC Vive had that the Valve Index didn't have, was OLED displays. And so the Vive was OLED, and there's some downsides to it, but I think for me anyway, the black levels, the black being off, really helps for immersion in VR.
Sure.
But there are so many other things to be positive about, and going back to SteamOS running on ARM, running on Linux, and Steam VR natively running on Linux, there's the potential for a VR environment running off the ARM part of the Steam VR headset, while allowing you to pass through the AAA VR experience from your PC. Before, I've always unloaded everything I can to get optimal performance. But now I can see, the Steam VR has this environment where you can create it yourself. You can put screens anywhere you want. You can be sat on top of a mountain in a house. All of that has to be kind of side loaded alongside the games you may be playing or whatever experience loading. Now, for me, it's pretty exciting that maybe you could just have that environment living on your ARM headset device with absolutely no degradation in quality. This is your virtual environment where you can load games into it. And, 2D games are a really big part of it. All kind of locks into this.
I mean, obviously, KDE desktop in VR, that's exciting to think about, right? I just want to have the wobbly windows where I can just kind of
what about
or the cube? The cube is what I meant, not wobbly windows. The 3D cube, But okay, so what I don't hear a lot of people talking about, and I haven't consumed all of the media that's out there, but it's not just a VR device. It's a computer, and Valve was very, forward about, they were very explicit about that. It's a computer, but it's a computer that can theoretically play the vast majority of Windows games that are running on Linux right now. All of those, the VR Windows titles, everything on Linux and everything on Android, 3D and 2D, on the Steam frame. All of that happening because of an emulation layer called FEX. It was revealed today that Valve started hiring for FEX, not hiring necessarily, but started recruiting and funding developers to work on this, x86 Windows to ARM solution called FEX in 2016. So for almost 10 years, they've been quietly funding this, and like they've had a very long-term vision for this thing. By the time the Steam Frame comes out, this has been in the oven for 10 years.
Valve seem this is my personal opinion, they seem very good at hedging their future. And so starting or contributing to something like FEX 10 years ago is just another kind of bet on there. Well, we'll need something to translate to ARM at some point.
And he also said later in the interview that one of their biggest hopes for developers is that they can spend more time on their games and on their next games than porting games to Linux. And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you is, do you think with the advent of Proton and FEX that people making native Linux games is even necessary? And I think that with this, it's not a reality anymore.
Oh, no. I think you mentioned like Windows titles and everything running on the ARM-based Steam Frame. I think probably the results are going to be very modest. But I mean, for the average Steam library, that's going to mean a lot. I mean, I have hundreds of games, many of which are probably older than 10 or 15 years. That article you talk about, I think, mentioned Hollow Knight. I can see. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hollow Knight Silk Song, he's playing it on his new Samsung Galaxy phone using the open source technologies that Valve is helping fund and develop. And there is no Android version of that. So
it's amazing. It's incredible. I mean, but I think it'll be in terms of the Windows titles we'll be able to play natively on the Steam Frame. I think it'll be pretty modest, but still wonderful. A still wonderful library. Probably, games that are 8 or 9 years old. In terms of VR, I'm really not sure what it means. There are loads of games. I mean, in theory, Beat Saber or some table tennis games, but I'm not trying not to set my expectations too high.
I think that I'm most excited about being able to play my 2D games on there. And I'm also, so the other aspect of this is the streaming technology, right? I guess if you're not using the Frame as a standalone PC and you're streaming content from, say, the Steam machine or a beefy, gaming PC that you have, then there's really no performance barriers at all, right?
Yeah. They say the latency is milliseconds, which is what we're talking about with the screen anyway, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
And 6 gig wireless, that's super exciting that it does all of these things, because if you really want to get into it, you're going to need a really good PC. But at the same time, if you want to kick back and, watch a film with your partner who happens to be the other side of the world in the same virtual cinema, you're going to be able to do that without anything else.
That's so awesome. I feel like the Steam Frame is sort of the VR equivalent of the Steam Deck. I mean, the Steam Deck is a potato. When you really get down to it, it's optimized. Everything about that machine and SteamOS is optimized, but it's still a very modest as far as hardware and performance power. It's very, very modest. And yet it can play up until this year, with games like maybe Space Marine 2 and really, really intensive games like that. It could play anything.
Yeah.
Maybe you had to use FSR. Maybe you had to lower the resolution. Maybe you had to bump everything down to low. And I feel like that's kind of where maybe the Steam Frame is coming into the VR space too, as at least the standalone side of it. What would you do with it? You got a Steam Frame in your house on day one. What is the first thing you're doing with it?
There are so many things now that I'm putting my index on because I want to experience in the Frame. So I love watching games, watching films, watching videos. I actually love the 2D game experience has been in there for a while, but it's pretty clunky. I'm looking forward to not having this heavy thing hanging off my nose and something that I'm not tethered because I'm still using the index. Right. I'm looking forward to the kind of the direct user experience. But there's so much. I love Elite Dangerous in VR. That is just one of the most incredible games. And there are some great ways to visit different parts of the world. Google Earth is one of my favorite experiences. Go to Kathmandu, go to Paris. You get a real sense. Okay, so it's not the same, but you do get a sense of being elsewhere. And I think that's really important. It's really important for people who don't have the space or the ability to kind of move necessarily, but also if you're sat on an aeroplane and just need to escape. I've played the longest in the oldest games, Skyrim. You can mod it. in all the ways that people
Can
mod
you
it.
mod it in Linux? Is that just as easy modding it in Linux as in Windows? I
think I haven't tried that. I think you were talking about whether Linux native games are still going to be as important. I think the answer has to be no. I think Win32 has become the default API for Linux gaming, and it works best at the moment. And the other thing, you mentioned the Steam Deck and the fact that it's very modest also in its spec, and that's really worked well in its favor. Games developers target consoles specifically, and the amazing things they squeeze out of even the PlayStation 4.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's what's really happened with the Steam Deck, as I'm sure you've seen it. People started testing their game for the Steam Deck, and it doesn't matter that it's a 720p screen. What they've been able to do is make it look much better. And in fact, the bottleneck for VR, in my experience, is the GPU. It's not the screen resolution. So the resolution on the frame is a 5-year-old technology. But what that does mean is that you'll be able to use oversampling if you care about this stuff. And that is much more, that produces a much higher quality image. It's like whether you prefer to see anti-aliasing or the raw lines on something. So you'll be able to really over dial everything if you really care about it.
For emulation, that's going to be one heck of a fun machine.
There's
8 or 9 years ago, whenever this game called The Climb came out, it was the same studio that does Crysis. They developed a game called The Climb.
I remember it.
And that game gave me vertigo. I have a fear of heights, and that game legitimately gave me vertigo standing still. Not even, just doing the climbing motions and looking down, and it was real enough for me.
Maybe that is something we should mention. It isn't. I don't think it's good for everyone. People genuinely get motion sickness from this stuff.
Yeah.
I think he was thinking.
I can't do a racing game at all. There's no racing game I can do that doesn't make me sick in VR.
I mean, I have found that having a cockpit, that's why Elite Dangerous works so well for me. Make it bigger, having something that stays static, as big as you can in the foreground, really helps for some reason trick the brain.
So the reason I asked you, what are you going to do with it first? And you kind of struggled initially to think.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Valve is going to have a difficult time marketing the Steam Frame. There's no question that it's going to be a quality device, right? But who is it for and what does it do is going to be, I think, a challenge for Valve to communicate, because it does so many things. Does it do all those things well? I don't know. What does it do the best? I don't know. It's just, there's so many unknowns, but
I think it's a good point. And I think I've tried to avoid jumping wholly on the VR hype train whenever it's surfaced. I think, we have this real problem with motion sickness and the fact that it's an unnatural way for a lot of people to experience things. But I think and I feel a lot of people must also feel that this really does feel like the future of human-computer interaction. To put on that thing, you are in a different world. And I still think it'll take some further steps in hardware innovation to get there. But what I think is that is the destination. So that is where I think we're going. And I think it's an incredible privilege to be able to just be able to stick that on your head and experience it. But yes, that's a really good point. It's a difficult sell outside of those of us who are really engaged with it.
Yeah. What's interesting, well, this is all fascinating, but The Verge is calling the Steam Frame a Trojan horse. If you wrote off the Steam Frame as yet another VR headset few will want to wear, I guarantee you're not alone. But the Steam Frame isn't just a headset, it's a Trojan horse that contains the tech gamers need to play Steam games on the next Samsung Galaxy, the next Google Pixel, and perhaps ARM gaming notebooks to come. And then that's when he starts talking about, I know this because I'm playing Hollow Knight Silksong on my Samsung Galaxy right now. It's crazy to see how far Linux gaming and Proton has come in just 3 years. Just the 3 years since the Steam Deck launched. I think at a much faster pace than before the Steam Deck launched, right? Because weren't there about 3 or 4 years between when Valve launched Proton to the release of the Steam Deck? That time period, there was some great improvement, but since the Steam Deck launched, it's just been...
I buy games without even looking at the Steam Deck support.
If it's a single player game, it's going to run, period. That's I think where we're at.
Yeah.
If it's a multiplayer game with certain types of anti-cheat, it's going to run also, like Arc Raiders.
Yeah.
Like Halo Infinite. So yeah, I was telling someone I feel kind of bad for ProtonDB.com because they were such a critical resource for years and years, and now it's just like
they've basically ascended. I think Valve really has a thing for VR. I think it can see it as the end, the same destination, and the two
company-wide
things
personal passion. I think is what it feels like, right?
Passion. I think it's a passion. I don't think they think that the frame is going to. I don't know. I hope it does, but I don't think it's going to be a huge seller. But it's their bookmark for it's been 6 years since the Index. It's their bookmark in time for how things are going, and the fact that they can combine that with the parts of the organization, a very small organization that are helping get ARM compatibility for games, is a bit of a synergy that they used for this.
Do you think that retroactively, the Steam frame and FEX and all of this progress on ARM architecture, does that retroactively improve a product like the Index?
Well, I think actually it makes it more accessible because, for the Index, you needed a $1,000 GPU at the least. If that's going to make, if ARM gaming brings the price down for running those kind of titles that you may otherwise have needed a decent GPU, then yeah, absolutely. Or it means you can do it on your laptop. Because
you sort of had to have, you had to have an overpowered system to compensate for all of the overhead, right? The performance overhead that you were losing to the translation layer. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think they're always very woolly and ambiguous. It's very much like Proton. The way that I seem to understand it is that they identify certain patterns in FEX instructions that they know they've got an efficient routine for in ARM. And so they signal that as something they recognize as having an efficient ARM routine, and then the last step will just run the ARM code for that. So it becomes like a meta set of instructions. When everything is translated into this meta state, then the performance is going to be excellent. If there are still missing gaps, then you're going to hit kind of bottlenecks at certain parts.
So I have another quote about this, actually. Let me try to dig it up here. So this is from an engineer. I don't know which engineer, but an engineer at Valve who was speaking to Digital Foundry. And he said the translation layer, and we're talking about FEX, the translation layer implements the x86 instructions atop ARM and does it actually at a very modest performance cost. I think we've been quoting numbers of 10 to 20% nominal, but that's not 10 to 20% of the game's performance. So you can't just multiply the FPS numbers, for example. It would be 10 to 20% of the CPU code that is running inside of the game process, because we try, as you were saying, we try to run native code as much as we can. So all of the APIs that a game in a PC space would traditionally rely upon, those are all implemented natively.
You said like a compatibility layer. I think that's identifying certain patterns and then knowing how those patterns can get exact equivalent output on ARM is that kind of translation. So ARM's super efficient in lots of ways that x86 isn't. So there are, we see this with Rosetta.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't have much experience with ARM aside from using a MacBook, really.
Well, you see, if you've used Rosetta 2 specifically, Apple's doing almost exactly the same thing. And it basically is the physical architecture of ARM CPUs versus x86 CPUs. It's the way that the actual processing units are organized, the way that the different parts are parallelized, and the way that there are different instructions for doing different things that make them very optimized, especially for power efficiency, which is why but that now we're seeing a kind of, I think, a carryover where they've become so powerful at certain aspects that you can translate what legacy, it's kind of, I don't know, it's not really brute force, but the established way of doing something into what have become like the cutting edge CPU architecture.
How did Valve do this faster and I would say better than Microsoft? How did that happen? Because if you look at the gaming story on, Microsoft had this big push to ARM laptops, 2 years ago, maybe? And gaming on that is a dumpster fire still. I'm pretty sure that a lot less Windows games run on Windows ARM, then Windows games run on Linux, right?
Yeah.
So here you have Valve coming to the table saying, okay, we made this translation layer, or let's call it an emulation layer. By the way, I love what Valve said in this interview about Wine. They give a lot of credit to code weavers and a lot of credit to Wine, and they say that, you know, what you see in Proton is just a sneak peek of what's coming to Wine, and it benefits everybody. And that's
all
awesome.
of this is. I mean, there are many ways to answer your question, but all of this is open source. I mean, I think they're paying for like a single developer on FEX, but all of this code is available for Microsoft to use. You know, that's what's so wonderful about it.
Right. So I guess I can't wrap my head around how a multi-billion or trillion-dollar company has not managed to solve the gaming on ARM on their own OS. Where Valve has come along and they're like, you know what? Play anything from any OS, from any architecture on this. It's fine.
I make some guesses. I mean, you've got to say Apple did a similar thing. macOS, is obviously BSD based. BSD Unix systems, they were built with the intention of being portable to work on lots of different architectures of computer. They did in the 70s. So maybe there's something intrinsically different in these BSD or Unix-based operating systems that makes them more portable, that maybe, this is purely my own opinion, maybe Microsoft struggles with something that's been so welded to x86 architecture for so long, especially when it comes to performance pipelines.
Interesting. I want to say that it feels like another nail in Windows' coffin, at least for gamers. I think you can forecast that 5 years from now, Linux gaming market share will probably have doubled, at least. Maybe not daily driver Linux use, but gaming just from devices like the Steam Deck, like the Frame, like the Steam Machine. And then at that point, do you feel like when, I don't know, there's 7 to 10% of people gaming on Linux, whether that's SteamOS or Ubuntu or whatever, do you think that developers then will actually start paying more attention as far as anti-cheat and I don't know.
I hope so.
Because that's like all right.
I know we're in a bit of a bubble, or I'm in a bit of a bubble, but I have seen people don't care that the Steam machines are running Linux. They actually see the SteamOS experience on the Steam Deck and they want it. They want the native cloud saving, the suspend resume, the kind of console-like experience with the vast library and the far cheaper prices and no subscription service that comes with, sounds like an advert, that comes with Steam.
We're reaching to the choir, but yeah.
I mean, I have spoken to people who are looking for gaming PCs, and depending on the price of the Steam machine, they're indifferent about whether it's Linux.
Really?
With the exception being Fortnite. But that's something I do hope will change. But
can you play the Android version of Fortnite on the Steam Frame?
Now, that's a good question. That's a really good question.
That doesn't have the same level of anti-cheat integration, does it? I don't know about these things. It's just...
Well, it's a kernel thing, so I don't know.
Oh, I'm going to have to dig into that. That could be a game changer, at least for some people. I love the fact that Linux is now a feature, an expected feature, and not something that detracts from the experience,
Yeah,
like
right.
When I was covering handheld gaming at Forbes, you would constantly see big outlets like IGN or The Verge or, those guys, when the Asus ROG came out, or when the, Lenovo Legion Go, not the S with SteamOS, but the, regular Lenovo Legion Go came out, they were complaining about the fact that it shipped with Windows. And that's such an unusual, very, very recent type of attitude to have, where it's like, man, it's a bummer this doesn't ship with SteamOS and Linux.
Yeah.
That's wild to hear mainstream outlets saying that, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that I don't think we've mentioned it briefly, but it's your computer. It's your thing. You can run, KD, you can install whatever you want on it. You can store the Epic Games Store if you want to. You can do anything you want to. And, when you, like we all do, switch between various walled gardens and then SteamOS and Linux, it's just like your eyes wide open at the possibility and potential of a different kind of world, but a world that really does exist in Linux and on SteamOS.
That's beautiful. That's a quote. That's going to be like a short. That's going to be a Linux for Everyone short right there.
That's the other reason why so many of us use Linux, because that passion that you have for computers is really driven by being able to do what you want and scratch your own itch and go down your own paths. It's really important. Well,
hey, it's why the Linux kernel was created.
Yeah.
Right? By Linus. I mean, he wanted an operating system that suited his needs, and so he built it.
Yeah.
And that's what we see. That's like the spirit of open source software ever since then. Right?
Yeah.
For better or for worse. I mean, there's fragmentation and there's different package managers and different window compositors and all this stuff, but it's also the beauty of it is having all that choice. But now the journalist inside of me has to wonder, is there any danger to having Valve becoming such a giant in the Linux gaming space? It's just an open-ended question. There's a lot of, theoretical scenarios that could unfold in the next 5 to 10 years with Valve having such a foothold right now.
The first thing I thought of is when you said being the journalist and then asking a question in the headline is Bettridge's law of headlines. And so the answer is always no.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'll pose that to the audience too. I know that there are people, they say things like, well, Valve's getting kids addicted to gambling, or, Valve just has too much control over the gaming ecosystem.
My personal kind of private philosophy is really not to read the comments. I try to judge organizations and people by their actions and not by what other people say. And it's very easy for people to criticize. I'm just as guilty of criticizing people and criticizing processes and things. So I fail at this as well, but it's easy to criticize and not offer an alternative. And I don't think there's an alternative that's close. And if any of those people can think of an alternative, this is the space where you can do it. You can't do it on a PlayStation. It's much harder to do it on an Xbox, and will be becoming much harder to do it on Xbox. It's getting harder to do it on Android. It's getting harder to do it on Apple. All of these things require development accounts. They're trying to, so this is the place to do it. And I'd like to see people try.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy outlook. I mean, if you're not comfortable with the level of, control or whatever you want to call it that Valve has in the Linux gaming space, just fork it all and start your own thing.
Yeah.
We've seen relatively new Linux projects like Bazite. It's kind of a pretty amazing success story what Universal Blue has managed to accomplish with Bazite in just a few short years. Everybody knows about SteamOS, yes, but a lot of people that I'm seeing when they're having the conversation about switching away from Windows, they're talking about using Bazite, not SteamOS. And that just, I guess that's all to say that I think that illustrates your point really beautifully, is that they saw an opportunity, they saw an opening, and they built this thing. And in a few short years, it became a pretty moderately successful project. And that is the beauty of open source. Build what you want to use, and if it's good, then I feel like it'll find some level of success through word of mouth or whatever.
I think there's always risk, and there's the risk that Valve is very dominant at the moment. The leadership at least seems to be doing it in a way that's mostly, we all agree, is a good approach. They're not locking anybody particularly in. There's no subscription, but things will change, I'm sure.
Yeah,
and then I guess we'll have to deal with that when it happens.
I really shouldn't say Valve. I really should say Steam. Steam specifically being such a monopoly in the PC gaming space. Epic Games is a footnote. All the other, things that everyone else has tried, like EA's tried Origin, and Ubisoft has tried Uplay or whatever it's called, and they're just footnotes. And I just worry about a day when Valve, maybe under new leadership, they want more of a cut, or they tighten the reins with I don't know. But like you said, let's judge them on their actions. instead of
And
what
not
our
worry about the future.
unfounded fears are.
Yeah.
And their actions are basically like, you guys are saviors right now. They have had this vision since 2012 with the original Steam machines in 2012. I mean, yes, they were a failure, but Valve has seen this highway into the future for, I don't know, I'm just babbling now.
Who knows whether they really expected Steam machines or SteamOS at the time to succeed. But they needed to have the expertise in developing their own, well, it was initially Ubuntu, then Debian-based OS, what
That's
worked and what
right.
didn't work, developing the hardware, working with partners. You know this, you have to try something to be able to get that real-world experience of solving the problems, and then you move on to try again, and you keep trying.
by
So you
doing.
have to start somewhere. Yeah, exactly.
Do you know why Valve at one point switched from an Ubuntu base or a Debian base to Arch?
I don't know. I could guess. I mean, I don't want to say it as an Arch user, but it's a lot easier to build it in the way that you want. You can see that it's a lot easier to build it up from scratch and rebuild it again. It's a lot easier to make it without it being a declarative Linux OS. It's a lot easier to get some of the benefits of both if that's how you want to do it. And of course, it's super cutting edge in lots of ways if you need that as well.
Yeah. Because I'm sure it wasn't about just having access to a newer kernel, right? Because they could have just used the Debian base and threw a new kernel in there. So it's more about probably the immutable aspect of it all.
Maybe they could make it immutable without breaking so much from upstream Arch, whereas they'd be breaking some kind of Debian philosophy maybe in trying to do this with Debian, but this means that they still keep within the main line of Arch progress really without breaking anybody's philosophy, maybe.
Right.
So you've not used VR for some time. What's the first thing? Why are you so interested in the frame?
I'm interested in the frame because I haven't been satisfied with the MetaQuest. The last time I used a MetaQuest 2, I still have it in the drawer. I maybe used it for 2 or 3 hours. I just, I wasn't satisfied with the library, with the experience, with the mandatory meta account linking, all that stuff. I started out being interested in the frame just because of its potential impact on Linux gaming. And then I started thinking about all of the potential that it has beyond just VR. So this is a weird realization that I had. The frame sort of reminds me of the Wii U, the Nintendo Wii U. At least there's like a marketing opportunity for that, right? Where I think one of Nintendo's commercials, was talking about how, well, if your parents or your roommates are using the big TV in the living room, you can just, transfer it to your gamepad and play on there. And I feel like something like the frame provides that same kind of experience where you can just kind of bring the gaming from the big screen in your living room to your face. I don't know. I'm not articulating that very well, but
you might not have a big screen or the room to have a big screen, or you may live in a house. You just want to sit down on a sofa somewhere and escape and play. Yeah.
I guess if I had to distill that answer into one sentence, it would be, I started realizing that it's a Linux PC and not just a VR headset. It's a Linux PC that I can do so much with, It's like a discovery device. I love discovering new stuff and playing with new things. And I think that there's the opportunity for that on the Steam frame is just going to be off the charts. Just so much you can do with it.
It wouldn't surprise me. And when you look at how modular the Steam frame is, the fact that you can remove that whole front part that contains the processor and the screens and the lenses, that looks very like you could snap on an OLED equivalent or a much more powerful ARM equivalent.
A modular upgrade, right?
Yeah.
Man.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a much more expensive micro OLED version.
Huh. Okay, last question. When are we getting a Steam phone? Do you think we'll ever get a good Linux-based phone? I haven't been following that space for 4 or 5 years.
I think we're quite far away from that happening. Android is becoming under Google's control a bit more locked down, a bit harder to keep open. The AOSP is getting more and more delayed. we still have the same problem with the firmwares on the modems of phones that we can't get to that part. There are people that are trying. There are people who have made a brave effort, but nothing that is going to, I think, help them get past this kind of small group of people who really care about this stuff. I think the best, when people don't accept it, but I think Lineage is probably our best chance of something like this. But I think it's a pretty desperate situation.
Maybe all of this stuff that Valve is doing will trickle down to that space too. Who knows? It's all about that. If on mobile phones for me though, well, not just for me. I don't like really using my phone, but when it comes down to it, are the apps there that I need to use?
And I've become reliant on my banking app working, and I have to say contactless payments. So it's hard enough in my world without Facebook and without WhatsApp and without Instagram because of the decisions I've made. I can't, I've made a few choices, but I can't take it any further unless I'm prepared to live in a hut up a mountain.
You can only do so much. It's not a bad idea. You can only do so much.
Yeah.
Before you go, I wanted to give you a chance to just kind of promote your stuff, what you're into, any links, any podcasts.
My regular podcast is Late Night Linux.
Good podcast.
But
Very
that's
good. Long-running podcast, right? How long you guys been going now?
Joe must have been, I think I've been doing it for about 9 years, but it existed before then, so maybe 10 or 11 years.
What is latenightsynth.com? I went to that URL and it was just it was nothing. It was dead or it was something. I don't know.
I'm surrounded here by synthesizers, which is kind of the hobby that I never get a chance to explore because I don't have enough time. And I keep doing on the other podcast these kind of asides where open source music generating software or synthesizers. I'll show a bit here.
Yeah, please do. Whoa! Hello.
So
that looks complex and fun.
It's a lot of fun. And so whenever I do these kind of synth sections on Late Night Linux, and I haven't done one for a while, I always get a lot of people saying they'd love to hear more, which is a bit of a joke because lots of people say we don't want to hear any more. And what I've promised to do for a couple of years is do a late night synth, at least as a one-off, which I haven't got around to doing, but that's what the domain name is about.
Interesting. I don't know if you're interested in doing a collaboration or anything, but I'm going to be talking. Do you know who Veronica Explains is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm talking to her next week, and we're talking mostly about open source music production.
Wow. So yeah.
And that's something that I have been really wanting to get into as a musician, and I'm scared. And so that's going to be, a good step towards doing that is getting her knowledge and just talking to her about how she does it, what her pipeline is, what her tool set is. But I think it'd be fun to do like a bunch of Linux podcasters get together and write a song or something.
Yeah.
That'd be cool,
Well, the thing is,
I don't play keyboards, so
25 years ago, I really took it seriously and tried to do something. But since then, I'm a geek. It's just become a big research project. I've written my own sequencer that runs on this thing, which is just a load of lights and buttons.
I would love to hear some of that.
I'm really interested in sound and repetition and what makes good music. So if I turn this stuff on, I'm just a mad scientist rather than a composer.
That sounds like a blast. Honestly,
it's a lot of fun.
It sounds like a blast.
You have nothing to show for it.
Well, it doesn't have to be for us. It can just be for you and you alone. Yeah. But and
I've accepted that. I think I've accepted that. In my 50s, I'm never going to be the next pop star.
Well, but you can still have fun trying.
Yeah. And also, maybe I should release this weirdly self-indulgent, repetitive electronic music.
Well, thank you so much for being here and talking to us about all this stuff. I could talk about Linux gaming in general for days on end. Okay, last question, and then we'll say goodbye. What are you rocking as your daily driver distro?
So I work for Canonical, so I do spend a lot of time with Ubuntu. But for a long time, Arch has been my daily driver for over a decade.
Vanilla Arch, pure Arch.
Well, basically. I wrote a KDE application. I've been a KDE user.
Which one?
So the K album application I talked about at the very beginning.
Okay.
It was KDE. So it doesn't exist since 2003.
Oh, I was about to look it up. Shoot. Okay.
You can probably Now
Probably
you could,
get an archive somewhere.
yeah, you can get an archive. I've got the code on GitHub, but there was a mode in it where you could export your photo collection as a web page, as an HTML page. And so if you put in quotes on the internet, generated by K album, you can still find a lot of websites that were generated by that application, usually in the early mid 2000s.
That's really cool. You're kind of a trailblazer, man.
Oh wait, there's
awesome.
I mean, if I'd have thought about it, there's so many things I could have done to mess with SEO and capitalize on people building websites with my product, but I never did any of it.
Well, dude, thank you so much for spending the time at the end of a long day for you, because you're about 8 hours ahead, right?
I've really enjoyed it. It's been a day full of meetings, and this has been my favorite one.
Yay! Awesome. I love having conversations like this with people in the community and geeking out over stuff, and like that's something that I can't get anywhere else. So
that's a rare skill as well, I think. It's easy to take it for granted because maybe you don't see it, but it is not so many people have it or are able to do it. So you do.
But I'll tell you what, I was nervous as hell before we got on camera.
Really?
Yeah, I was nervous as hell, man. Because I haven't done this in so long. Just anxiety over, I don't know, the technical side. Will the recording be okay? Like, will I sound like a dummy? Just stupid things, imposter syndrome things. But yeah, this.
I do feel the same way. I think everybody does. Well, unless you're a complete dick.
That's right. Only complete dicks don't have imposter syndrome. You heard it here first. Man. All right, dude. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Jason.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. See ya.
Cheers, Jason.